And please tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I would love to interact with you legends. Now to the story. Emily seemed interesting from the start. Her profile wasn't like everyone else's. She didn't write a long description, just one sentence that said, "Words are cheap, silence is sacred." I thought it was poetic or something philosophical. Her pictures looked normal, just her in parks, cafes, nothing weird. She messaged me first, but even that was short. She said dinner with a location and time. No small talk, no emojis, no details. I should have known right then that something was off. I showed up to the restaurant early. It was one of those quiet, mid-tier places where the lights are low, the music's soft, and people whisper over their drinks. She walked in exactly on time, no smile, no wave, just walked right over and sat down across from me. She looked normal, calm, clean, polite. I said hello, tried to start conversation, but she just nodded once and kept looking at the menu. At first, I thought maybe she was shy or nervous. I asked her how her day was, no response. I made a joke about the menu being too complicated, nothing. I thought maybe she didn't hear me, so I spoke a little louder. She looked at me briefly, then reached into her bag and slid a folded paper across the table. It wasn't handwritten. It was a printed pamphlet. The front had a title in bold letters. Why I've chosen selective silence until a man deserves my voice. I thought it was some kind of weird art project or a joke, but she just sat there, hands folded, waiting for me to open it. I did because what else was I supposed to do? Inside was a typed essay. It started with something about modern dating being corrupted by verbal manipulation and performative masculinity. It said she had spent years listening to men talk themselves into her attention, and she had decided to stop rewarding words with words. It said that true understanding could only happen when a man could communicate without ego, without sound. Halfway down the page, it got even stranger. It said that her silence was not rejection, but evaluation. She believed that a man's behavior when confronted with silence revealed his authentic character. It said she had taken a vow to only speak to a man after he had passed the test. I looked up at her. She was staring right at me, not smiling, not blinking, just waiting. I asked what this was supposed to mean, but of course she didn't respond. She just gestured to the paper again like I was supposed to keep reading. The next section said the test had 3 phases: observation, tolerance, and reflection. The observation phase was what's happening now. She'd stay silent and watch how I reacted. The tolerance phase was if I didn't leave. The reflection phase came after the meal, where I'd be given a quiz to measure comprehension. It wasn't even subtle. It literally said that if I laughed, got angry, or left early, I'd fail phase 1. I looked around to see if anyone else was noticing what was going on, but no one cared. She was perfectly calm. Sipping her water like this was completely normal. I tried to talk again. I told her this was weird, that I didn't understand what she wanted from me. She didn't flinch. I tried asking her questions. Nothing. Just eye contact. Long, unbroken, like she was meditating on my discomfort. I figured she'd eventually break, but she didn't. The waiter came over and she spoke to him just fine. Her voice was soft and polite, like nothing was wrong. She ordered for both of us without asking me what I wanted. Then, as soon as the waiter left, she went silent again. I sat there for 10 minutes, then 20, then 40. She just stared or occasionally looked at her phone, calm and blank. I tried small talk again, just to fill the silence. I asked about work, family, even random topics like movies or travel. Nothing. When the food came, she nodded her thanks to the waiter, picked up her fork, and started eating. She ate slowly, carefully, not looking at me. I didn't even feel like eating anymore, but I picked up my food just so it wouldn't look too awkward. After a while, she took out another paper from her bag and set it next to my plate. This one said, Phase 3, Reflection Quiz. It had actual questions printed on it. Things like, how did you feel during my silence? What assumptions did you make about me? What emotions surfaced that you couldn't express? And would you still want to know my voice if it came with no reward? It looked like something out of a psychology workshop. At the bottom, there was a final question. Describe your relationship with patience. I looked at her completely lost. She pointed at the pen next to it, then just waited. She wasn't eating anymore, just watching me like a teacher waiting for homework. I thought maybe if I filled it out, she'd actually talk. So I wrote short, confused answers to everything. For the last question, I wrote, I think this is the strangest thing that's ever happened to me. When I handed it back, she took the paper without looking at it, folded it neatly, and put it in her bag. Then she finally opened her mouth. She said, "Thank you for participating." That was it. Those were her first words the whole night. Then she stood up, put some cash on the table, and walked out. No goodbye, no explanation, just left. I sat there for a few minutes trying to process what happened. The waiter came by, so I looked confused, and asked if everything was okay. I said, yeah, just a weird date. He said, "You're not the first one." That got my attention. I asked what he meant, and he said she comes in every couple of weeks, always with a new guy, always silent, always leaving behind a pamphlet. He said last time the guy left in the middle of the meal. The time before that, she stayed for hours just watching him scroll his phone in frustration. He said she calls ahead every time to reserve the same table. Always the same order, same papers, same silence. I left right after that. When I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about the whole thing. It was like being trapped in some kind of social experiment I never agreed to. Out of curiosity, I Googled the title from her pamphlet. Why? I've chosen selective silence until a man deserves my voice. There were results. Turns out she runs a blog by that name. The site had dozens of posts describing case studies from her silent dates. She wrote about each man anonymously, describing their reactions. Some got angry, some laughed, some begged her to talk. She rated them on scales like emotional maturity, ego control, and tolerance threshold. I scrolled down and saw a new post from that very night. It said, Case 47, the distracted listener. She wrote that he showed signs of restlessness but maintained civility, and that his eyes betrayed curiosity rather than aggression. She gave me a 6 out of 10 and said, he is not ready yet. Then at the bottom, there was a short note, still searching for one who listens without noise. I closed the tab, deleted my dating apps, and went to bed. Sam looked normal enough on paper. His profile said he worked in tech, liked coffee, and believed in emotional equity. I didn't know what that meant, but everything else looked fine. His photos were all minimal, plain backgrounds, neutral clothes, clean haircut. He seemed like one of those calm, analytical types. He messaged me first, asking if I liked innovation and human scalability. I thought he was joking, so I said sure. He said that was promising compatibility. We decided to meet at a cafe that he picked. It was this small place downtown that felt half like a workspace and half like a date spot. When I walked in, I saw him immediately. He was sitting by the window with the laptop open, typing quickly. He stood up when he saw me, smiled politely, then immediately gestured to the chair across from him. He didn't even say hello before asking if I minded if he took notes during the interaction. I thought he was being ironic, but he wasn't. He had Google Doc already open with the words, "First date, pilot phase." I sat down, trying not to laugh, but he was completely serious. He said he was working on something revolutionary. Then he flipped his laptop toward me, revealing a PowerPoint presentation with a title slide that said, Project Empathy Chain. The subtitle read, Decentralizing Emotional Labor Through Blockchain-Backed Tokens. I thought it was some startup idea he wanted feedback on, but he said it was his life's mission. He said he'd been developing it for 2 years, and he'd already pitched it to 3 venture capitalists and 1 spiritual influencer. He said no one understood it yet because people aren't emotionally literate enough to quantify affection. Then he clicked to the next slide. He explained, in complete seriousness, that emotional labor, the effort people put into listening, supporting, and caring, should have financial value. He said the current dating market was inefficient because emotional contributions go unpaid. He wanted to fix that. His idea was to create a system where every act of emotional labor could be recorded as a digital token, an ELT, short for emotional labor token. He said users could earn or trade these tokens through his app by getting time, empathy, or validation. He said love, trust, and patience were all measurable assets if you had the right algorithms. He said the platform would run on a dual currency system, intimacy credits and accountability points. It was one of the strangest things I'd ever heard, but he talked with total confidence, clicking through graphs and diagrams like he was pitching to investors. There was even a mock-up of a dating app interface with tabs labeled Emotional Yield, Support Ledger, and Intimacy Index. He said every person would have a score showing how much empathy they'd invested versus withdrawn. He looked at me expectantly, waiting for a reaction. I said it was definitely creative. That just made him light up. He said he could tell I was open to paradigm shifts. Then he started talking about how dating should be restructured around emotional economics. He said relationships fail because people freeload affection. He said his app would prevent that by keeping a transparent ledger of emotional transactions. He said no more guessing who cares more. Everything would be visible in real time. He was serious the entire time. His tone never broke. Halfway through the pitch, the waiter came by, and Sam ordered black coffee, no sugar, no milk. He didn't ask what I wanted. He said he preferred to eliminate unnecessary decisions during discussions of innovation. After the waiter left, he turned back to his slides and said he wasn't just looking for investors. He was looking for collaborators. He said emotional visionaries like me could become co-founders by intimacy. I didn't even know what that meant, but he explained it like it was a business structure. He said traditional startups use equity, but his used connection. He said co-founders by intimacy would share emotional responsibilities instead of financial ones. In his words, every kind of word is capital. Then he said he could already tell I had founder energy. He said he could feel my empathy from across the table. I hadn't even said much yet. He pulled out another slide, a list of potential partner tiers. Tier 1 was contributor. Tier 2 was emotional architect. Tier 3 was founding partner. He said Tier 3s were the most important because they helped build the emotional infrastructure. Then he looked right at me and said he thought I had potential for Tier 3. I said I didn't really know how startups worked, and he smiled like that was cute. He said that was perfect because I'd bring organic emotional perspective to his tech framework. He said I wouldn't have to do any coding, just emotional calibration. I asked what that meant, and he said we'd run connection experiments. He said things like eye contact sessions, trust curve mapping, and shared vulnerability metrics. I told him I didn't really do that kind of thing, and he said that was exactly why I needed to. He said emotional discomfort is an untapped growth frontier. I tried to steer the conversation towards something normal, but he just kept looping it back to his app. Every sentence somehow became about emotional value or human currency. When I mentioned my job, he asked how much empathy I gave versus received daily. When I mentioned my friends, he asked if I tracked their gratitude patterns. Then he asked if I consider investing. I laughed because I thought he was joking again, but he was dead serious. He said the entry point for early stage partners was $300. I told him I didn't really have money to throw at something like that, and he said it didn't have to be financial. He said intimacy counted as equity. He said I could earn shares through trust building. I said I wasn't sure I understood, and he said I didn't need to. He said emotional intuition can't always be explained with logic. Then he leaned forward and said if things went well, I could eventually help him beta test the relationship module. He said it's a part of the app where two people log their emotional exchanges in real time. He said it could revolutionize communication. I told him I had to go soon, and he said he expected that. He said most people aren't ready for innovation when they first encounter it. He said I'd probably think about it later and realize I'd missed a ground floor opportunity. I finished my drink fast and said I had to catch a bus. He said he'd send me the link to his investor packet anyway, just in case destiny recalibrates. When I got home, sure enough, there was an email from him with a Google Drive link labeled Empathy Chain Partnership Proposal. I didn't open it. I deleted the email and blocked his number. A few days later, I checked my spam folder and saw another message from a different address. It said, Invitation to Founding Partner Onboarding. The body of the email said, Your emotional data has been logged from our initial interaction. Welcome to Phase 1. I deleted that too. But last week, someone tried to follow me on Instagram with a handle called @empathychain_co-founder. The profile picture was Sam, smiling, holding his laptop. The bio said, Building the future of emotional currency, one connection at a time. I didn't follow back. Brooke came off as normal, actually more than normal. She was bubbly, confident, always joking in texts, and had that kind of energy that makes you think the date's going to be easy. Her profile said she loved dogs, road trips, and helping people get back on their feet. That last line stuck with me. I figured it meant volunteering or social work or something good-hearted. I didn't realize how literal she meant it. We matched on a Wednesday, made small talk for a few days, then agreed to grab dinner the following weekend. She picked the place, a mid-range American restaurant, one of those chain spots that tries to look classy but has sticky menus. She said it was her favorite because they had the best takeout boxes in town. I thought she was joking. When I got there, she was already sitting at the table, smiling, scrolling through her phone. She looked exactly like her photos, bright eyes, big personality, loud outfit. She waved me over and said she already ordered appetizers because she gets impatient. The waiter brought out fried calamari, nachos, and sliders, 3 plates already crowding the table. I hadn't even opened my menu yet. She told me to dig in, saying she hated eating alone. She was talkative, but in that kind of way where it's all one-sided. Every question I asked got answered and then turned into a story that looped back to her ex somehow. At first, it was subtle. She mentioned him casually, like part of an old story, but the mentions didn't stop. Within 20 minutes, I knew his first name, that they dated for 4 years, that he used to play guitar, and that he fell on hard times. I figured he was an ex she still felt bad for and nothing more. When the waiter came back, she ordered again, 4 full entrees. Not 4 sides or small plates. 4 actual meals. Pasta, ribs, a burger, and a steak. I laughed and asked if she was hungry, and she smiled and said, "Oh, not for me." She said she always orders extra for her ex. She said he's homeless now, living in some tent community across town, and she likes to bring him food whenever she can. She said it keeps her grounded. I sat there not knowing what to say. It wasn't the content. It was the way she said it, like this was a normal ritual she expected me to be impressed by. She started explaining how he lost his job a few years back and couldn't get back on track. She said most people abandoned him, but not her. She said he'd been her best friend since they were teenagers, and that you don't just throw people away because life tests them. The food came, and she didn't even touch most of it. She picked at a few fries, took a sip of her drink, then started asking me about my job. When I told her what I did, she perked up. She said I was perfect. She said her ex had been looking for a job, and I could totally help him out. I thought she was kidding, but she wasn't smiling. She said I probably had connections. She said I could find something easy for him, warehouse work, maybe cleaning, something to get him started. She said I'd be good for him, which made no sense at all. I told her I didn't really hire people, but she waved that off. She said everyone knows someone. Then she asked if I'd ever had a homeless friend before. I said no, and she said that was a shame. It teaches humility. She said her ex might be rough around the edges, but he had a good heart. Then she said something that made the whole thing 10 times weirder. She said she and her ex still talk every day. She said they have a mutual emotional pact and that he still calls her before bed most nights, even though he doesn't have a phone plan. He borrows someone's. She said sometimes when she misses him, she visits the encampment and they sit in his tent just talking. She said they'd light candles and eat takeout together. I didn't even know how to respond. She looked completely serious, like this was all normal relationship behavior. She said she was done romantically with him, but that she couldn't be done spiritually. Then she leaned closer and said she felt like he sent me to her. I asked what she meant, and she said she told him she was ready to start dating again, and that he always knew who was right for her. I tried to laugh it off, but she wasn't laughing. She said she told him about me already. I'd only met her once, and somehow her ex, who lived in a tent, already knew who I was. She said he was excited to meet me someday. Then she pulled out her phone and showed me pictures of him. They were recent, clearly taken near some campsite, sitting by a fire with a blanket wrapped around him. She scrolled through a few and stopped at one where he was smiling and holding a box of food. She said it was from her last date. I froze. She said whenever she goes on dates, she brings in the leftovers afterward. She said he always gets excited to see what her new guy picked out. I realized the 4 entrees weren't just a kind gesture. They were a pattern. She'd been doing this every time. When the waiter came back, she asked for boxes immediately, not even pretending to eat more. She carefully packed each dish into separate containers, labeling them with napkins. Then she stacked them neatly in a bag. She said presentation mattered. She said dignity keeps people human. Then she looked at me and said I should come with her to drop it off. She said it'd mean a lot to him. I said I couldn't, that I had to be up early. She tilted her head, confused, like she didn't understand why I wouldn't want to. She said he'd love to thank me personally for dinner. I told her I didn't pay yet, but she said she'd already handled it. That made no sense because I didn't see her card go through. She smiled and said she had connections here. When I went to double check with the waiter, he said she just added everything to her account. Apparently she had a tab there. She was standing by the door when I came back. She said she'd text me when she was done dropping the food off. I told her it was fine, but she said she always keeps her dates updated for transparency. That night, around midnight, I got a message from her. It was a photo of a candlelit table outside, dirt on the ground, 2 plates, and the food I'd watched her box up. Her ex was sitting there, smiling, holding a fork. She captioned it. He says thank you. He liked the ribs. I didn't respond. The next morning, she sent another message saying he thought I had a trustworthy aura and wanted me to help him find work soon. Then she said she'd invite me to the campsite next time. She said she'd cook something homemade. I blocked her number. 2 weeks later, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. When I checked, it was a man's voice. Low, calm, slightly echoing like he was outside. He said thanks for the dinner and that he hoped to meet me soon, and that Brooke only picks the good ones. I deleted the message, but that voice still sticks in my head. Ryan looked like the kind of guy who planned his life in spreadsheets. His profile said he was into structure, leadership, and legacy building. He had a picture in front of some military museum, another of him hiking, and one in a pressed shirt standing beside a bookshelf filled with history books. His bio was short, I believe in purpose. I thought that meant career goals were something ambitious. I didn't realize how literal he meant it. He messaged me the day we matched. He wrote in full paragraphs. No emojis, no small talk. He asked about my views on family, education, and discipline. I said I hadn't really thought that far ahead, and he said it was fine, that he was used to being the one with vision. It sounded a little cocky, but not crazy. We set up a date for the weekend. He picked the restaurant himself. It was his old-fashioned steakhouse that felt like someone's grandfather designed it. Everything smelled like cigars and varnish. He was already seated when I got there, wearing a collared shirt perfectly ironed, with his hair slicked back. He stood up, shook my hand like we were doing a business deal, then gestured for me to sit. Right away, the conversation felt like an interview. He didn't ask about favorite movies or hobbies. He asked what kind of legacy I wanted to leave. I tried to keep it light, saying I just wanted to live comfortably, maybe travel, maybe have a family one day. He nodded and said that was a neutral answer, which apparently wasn't good or bad, just non-directional. Then he leaned forward and said something that threw me off. He said the biggest mistake people make in relationships is not thinking about the naming stage. He said names are the foundation of destiny. I thought he was speaking metaphorically, like naming your goals or something. But he clarified right away. He meant literal names. He said names shape identity, and that's why he'd already picked out a list for his future children. He said he didn't want to waste time with someone who wouldn't respect that. I laughed, thinking he was joking, but he wasn't smiling. He pulled out his phone and showed me a document labeled Approved Lineage Names. It was a spreadsheet, columns, color-coded, organized by gender and historical relevance. He scrolled through, reading them out loud. Irwin, Montgomery, Zhukov, Yamamoto, Eisenhower, MacArthur. Every single name belonged to some obscure or not so obscure military general from different countries. He said each one carried the energy of leadership. He told me he planned to have at least 3 sons and possibly 1 daughter, but only if she showed the right temperament. I asked what that meant, and he said girls named after military strategists develop clarity and order. He mentioned one name he liked, Liu, from a Chinese general who led a rebellion centuries ago. He said it was short, commanding, and efficient. I stared at him, trying to figure out if this was a prank, but he just kept going, explaining how he tested each name's phonetic stability and behavioral resonance. He said he'd done his own study where he asked parents about their kids' personalities and compared them to historical figures with similar names. He claimed there was a correlation between strength-oriented names and success in life. It was insane, but the way he explained it sounded almost scientific. He wasn't laughing, wasn't trying to be edgy. He fully believed it. He told me he wouldn't consider marriage unless a partner agreed to adopt the same philosophy. He said he didn't want casual co-parenting or spontaneous naming. He said every child needed a pre-approved identity before birth. I asked if he'd actually dated anyone seriously before, and he said yes, but things ended when she refused to name their first son after Napoleon. I tried to change the subject to something normal, but he always found a way to bring it back. I mentioned I liked music, and he said he only listened to marching compositions because they reinforce discipline. I mentioned I liked traveling, and he said he only travels to historically significant battle sites. When our food came, he didn't eat right away. He pulled out a small notepad and said he liked to take notes during first dates to track behavioral cues. I laughed again, but he wasn't kidding. He wrote things down while glancing up at me between bites. At one point, he asked if I'd ever felt called to leadership. I said I didn't think so, and he said that meant I probably had submissive potential. He said that wasn't an insult, it was valuable for balance. The whole dinner felt like I was being interviewed for a role in his imaginary army. Then he asked how I felt about raising children under a command-based household. He said traditional parenting failed because it lacked hierarchy. He said his ideal family structure was modeled after military chain of command. He'd be the general, his wife the lieutenant, and the children the cadettes. He said everyone wouldn't have assigned duties and daily check-ins. I told him that sounded strict, and he said strictness builds greatness. He said people crumble without structure. He said that's why society is collapsing. Too many unranked homes. After dessert, I was ready to leave, but he wasn't done. He said before we ended the night, he wanted to make something clear. He said he didn't believe in dating for fun. He said he was interviewing for legacy partnership, and that he saw potential in me because I had strong eye contact and stable posture. Then he said the next step would be reviewing his family constitution. I thought he was kidding again, but he started digging through his bag and pulled out a thick binder with his initials embossed on the front. Inside were printed pages outlining household codes, moral obligations, and even naming hierarchies. He flipped to a section labeled Future Generational Vision and said I could read it later. I told him I didn't think we were compatible, but he just smiled calmly and said he had expected that. He said most people can't handle visionaries. He paid for dinner, stood up, and said he hoped I'd reconsider when I matured past modern confusion. Then he saluted me, a full straight-backed salute before walking away. When I got home, I blocked him on everything. But the next day, I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. It said, "Leadership is a calling, not preference. You had potential." I didn't reply. A few months later, I was scrolling YouTube and saw a channel recommendation called Destiny Engineering. The profile picture looked familiar. I clicked it. It was him. The videos were titled things like Naming Children for Power and Why Modern Women Fear Structure. In one of the thumbnails, I saw the restaurant we'd gone to. The video was called Case Study Number 4, The Resistant Type. He was sitting in front of the same table, explaining how his interview went with a woman who lacked generational focus. He didn't show my face, but he described me well enough that anyone could guess. He ended the video by saying, "Names build nations. Weak names build." Katie had one of those profiles that looked like a personality test threw up on it. It was full of charts, star signs, and words like ethically non-monogamous, emotionally self-aware, and relationship anarchist. I didn't fully understand what half of it meant, but she looked normal, smiling, casual clothes. Nothing too out there. She messaged first, saying she liked that my profile wasn't performative. I had no clue what that meant, but it sounded like a compliment, so I rolled with it. Our messages were long. She wrote like she was getting lectures, paragraphs about emotional frameworks, boundaries, and mutual evolution. She said she was poly, but structured about it. I didn't really get what that meant either, but I figured as long as she wasn't seeing 10 people at once, it didn't matter. We decided to meet at a small cafe near the city center. She picked it because she said it had the right energy. When I got there, she was already sitting at a table, drinking tea, staring out the window like she was deep in thought. She looked calm, almost too calm. She smiled when I walked over and said she was happy I was punctual. She said it showed emotional regulation, I just laughed, but she didn't. She took a sip of her tea and said she appreciated people who honor time. That should have been my first warning. The conversation started normal. We talked about jobs, movies, music, all the usual first date things. But the way she spoke made everything sound like a philosophy debate. If I said I liked a movie, she asked why and what emotional need it fulfilled. If I mentioned work, she'd ask how I centered my identity around labor. It was like being interviewed for a psychology experiment. Then she leaned in and said she wanted to be completely transparent before things went further. She said she was poly, but not in the way most people assume. I said I was fine with that, but she told me to wait because it was nuanced. She said she was emotionally monogamous, but physically monogamous. That confused me because that just sounded like being monogamous. But she explained it like a math equation. She said emotional monogamy meant she only bonded deeply with one person at a time. Physical monogamy meant she didn't sleep with anyone else unless her emotional tether approved it. But then she said she was financially non-monogamous, which meant she believed in redistributing abundance. I asked what that meant exactly, and she said she shares money, resources, and living arrangements with multiple partners, past and present, because love shouldn't end where logistics begin. I nodded slowly, pretending I understood, but she wasn't done. She said she was also legally married. My brain stopped processing for a second. I asked if she meant divorced, but she shook her head. She said no, legally still married. She smiled like it wasn't a big deal. She said they hadn't spoken since 2018, but still filed taxes together every year because it was strategically beneficial. She said marriage is just paperwork, and paperwork doesn't expire unless you let it. I didn't know how to react, so I just said okay, trying not to look weirded out. She said it's fine because the relationship had evolved into an administrative partnership. She said they don't communicate but occasionally share mail, and once a year they sign documents together at a neutral location, a diner halfway between their cities. I asked if her husband knew she was dating again, and she said he didn't need to. She said their dynamic existed outside traditional expectations. She said she likes to keep her emotional life independent from her legal one. Then she asked me how I felt about filing joint taxes in theory. I thought she was joking, but she wasn't smiling. She said sharing taxes is the most intimate act two adults can do. She said if you trust someone with your IRS information, you trust them with your soul. I laughed nervously, but she didn't even blink. She said she and her husband get a better return together and that she considered it a symbol of interdependence. She said they don't live together, don't talk, but still exist within each other's fiscal orbit. It felt like I was sitting across from someone who'd replaced all human emotions with logic. I tried steering the conversation to something normal, but she looped everything back to her frameworks. I asked about her hobbies. She said she studies attachment energies. I asked if she liked to travel. She said she only travels when energetically balanced. I asked if she believed in soulmates. She said yes, but in the tax sense. She asked if I'd ever co-signed anything with a partner before. I said no, and she said that was good. It meant I hadn't been financially enmeshed prematurely. She said financial enmeshment was sacred. By this point, I was counting the minutes until I could leave. But then she took out her phone and showed me a spreadsheet. It was color-coded. She said it was her relationship architecture chart. It had columns for names, connection types, and mutual benefits. There was a section labeled Administrative Partners and another for Energetic Dependence. My name wasn't on it yet, but there was an empty cell highlighted at the bottom. She said if things went well, I could eventually be listed under Emotional Development Trial. She said it usually takes about 3 months before someone gets a category. I asked how many people were currently in her system, and she said 6, not including her husband. She said 2 were active, one was transitioning to friendship mode, and another was on temporary fiscal probation. I asked what that meant, and she said he'd missed a Venmo payment. I finished my drink and said I had to get going because of an early meeting. She smiled and said she appreciated my boundary clarity. Then she handed me a small laminated card with a QR code on it. She said it linked to her relationship onboarding form. When I got home, curiosity got the best of me, so I scanned it. It led to a Google form titled Connection Application. The questions were insane. Things like, would you be open to co-owning assets within 5 years? And which percentage of your income feels comfortable to share with partners in need? I closed it immediately. The next day, she texted me saying she had a great time and that she'd added me to her observation queue. She said if I remained consistent, she'd consider moving me to phase 2. I didn't reply. 2 days later, she sent another message saying her husband saw our interaction on her shared calendar and approved the dynamic. I didn't even know what that meant, but that was the last straw. I blocked her. A few months later during tax season, I got an email from TurboTax saying someone had attempted to file using my email. I checked the sender info. It was the same Gmail she'd used to text me. I didn't report it, but I changed all my passwords and deleted everything connected to my financial info. Sometimes I wonder if she actually tried to claim me as a dependent. Zach didn't seem that weird at first. He was blunt, sure, but not in a creepy way. More like a guy who thought being honest made him deep. His profile had gym selfies, quotes about truth over comfort, and a link to his YouTube channel. I didn't click it at first. I figured it was probably some vlog or motivational thing. He asked to meet up fast, saying he liked women who didn't waste time with endless texting. I agreed because he seemed confident and direct. He suggested coffee in a public place, which sounded harmless. When I showed up, he was already there with a small camera set up on a tripod pointing directly at the 2 empty chairs. I thought he was filming something else, maybe a vlog before the date, but when he saw me, he grinned and said we'd start as soon as I signed the release. I froze. He handed me a clipboard with a printed sheet titled Content Consent Form. I asked what it was for, and he said it was standard for his series. I told him I didn't even know what his channel was about, and that's when he started explaining like it was nothing unusual. He said his channel helped men decode modern women. He said he filmed his dates to analyze behavior and teach self-improvement through observation. I laughed at first because I thought he was joking, but he wasn't. He started adjusting the camera, saying the lighting was perfect near the window. People around us were starting to stare. He said if I didn't want my face shown, he could blur it, but he still needed the footage for his audience. I told him no, but he just smiled and said I could still sit down and talk casually while the camera rolled. I don't know why I didn't leave right then. Maybe it was shock, or maybe I wanted to see how far he'd go. He started talking about his channel like it was a business. He said he'd been doing it for almost a year, that his audience trusted his analysis, and that women online were terrible at self-awareness. He said he teaches men to spot red flags early, things like interrupting, ordering expensive food, or checking their phones too much. He said he films real dates to give his viewers data, not theories. Then he said I looked promising. He pressed record. I sat there, not sure what to do, while he started introducing the video out loud like he was hosting a show. He said the date's topic was feminine composure and conversational discipline. He pointed at me and said I didn't know the topic ahead of time because it made the results more authentic. He asked me questions, random ones at first, what I do for work, what my goals are, what I think about modern relationships. Every time I spoke, he glanced at the camera and make little notes under his breath, like he was scoring me. At one point, he interrupted me to say my posture was unsettled and that it signaled resistance. It felt less like a date and more like an interrogation. When I tried to lighten the mood, he stopped smiling and said humor was a deflection mechanism. When I crossed my arms, he said I was defensive. When I asked him why he thought he had the authority to analyze people, he said data doesn't need authority. He said emotions lie, but numbers don't. He told me each date ends with a rating summary where he explains what went wrong. He said he'd only post if it met educational value. I told him I didn't consent to being in any video, and he said my refusal was already documented on film. He said that actually made it better because it showed boundary assertion, which he'd been trying to capture for months. He finished his coffee, stopped recording, and said he had enough material. He didn't even say goodbye. He just took the camera, nodded once, and left. I sat there for a while, trying to process what just happened. I called my friend on the way home and told her everything. She told me to look up his channel, so I finally did. It wasn't a small vlog. It had thousands of subscribers. The thumbnails were all screenshots of women sitting across from him at different capes and restaurants. Each title was worse than the last. Things like the red flag date, she talks too much, she's sweet but broken, testing feminine energy in public. The comments were full of men agreeing with him, breaking down women's facial expressions like they were science projects. I didn't see my video yet, but one was labeled New Upload, the defensive type. It had gone up less than an hour earlier. I clicked it. It was me. He hadn't blurred my face. The caption read, "This one refuses to be analyzed. Notice how she laughs to hide discomfort. Classic." He played clips from the conversation, cutting my words mid-sentence so they sounded sarcastic or rude. He zoomed in on my hands and face like I was proof of a theory. Then he paused and said, "See the eye movement? That subconscious guilt." The comment section was already filling up. Men calling me cold, calculating, fake. Some were debating whether I had trauma or arrogance. A few even tried guessing where I worked based on my outfit. It had over 40 views before I went to bed. I reported the video right away, flagged it for harassment, even sent an email to YouTube explaining everything. But the next day, it was still up. The comments doubled. Someone found my Instagram and started messaging me with timestamps, asking if the video was real. I deleted everything, set my accounts to private, blocked dozens of people, but they kept popping up under new profiles. 2 days later, the video was gone. Either YouTube took it down or he did. But that didn't help much because new ones kept appearing. Reaction videos made by other people analyzing his analysis. My face was still everywhere. Then I had a message from a private account. It said, "You handled yourself well. Most don't." I didn't reply. The next message said, "You do better on a second try. The first one's always a learning curve." I blocked it immediately, but the messages didn't stop. A few days later, someone left a comment under one of my old photos that said, "He's filming again next weekend. Want to see if he still calls you defensive?" That's when I changed my number and deleted every social media account I had. Months later, someone sent me a link through an old email I'd forgotten to deactivate. It was another upload on his channel, same format, same setup, different woman. The title was Date Number 47, the composed type. I clicked it just to see. In the background, for a split second, I saw myself. My reflection in the cafe window, blurred but still recognizable, sitting at that table during my date. He reused the footage, still studying me, still breaking me down. And underneath, the top comment said, "The last one looked colder." Lauren seemed normal enough online. She had pictures hiking, laughing with friends, sitting at coffee shops with her laptop. Her bio said she valued deep emotional connection and honest communication. She texted with a mix of curiosity and warmth, asking real questions instead of surface-level ones. She seemed mature, grounded, thoughtful. I figured I'd lucked out after a long streak of weird dates. We planned to meet at a nice restaurant downtown, one of those places that tries to look rustic but charges triple for small plates. I got there a few minutes early and texted her to let her know I was waiting. She said she'd be right there. When she walked in, she looked exactly like her pictures, put together, confident, calm. But she wasn't alone. There was a guy walking right beside her, older than me by a few years maybe, dressed casually but nice. I assumed he was a friend dropping her off or something. But then they both walked up to the host together. She smiled when she saw me and said my name, then introduced the guy next to her as her platonic husband. I thought she was joking, but she wasn't. She said it completely straight-faced, then told the host we needed a table for 3. I didn't know how to react. The guy didn't look awkward or surprised. He was calm, like this was a normal thing. I followed them to the table, trying to piece together what was happening. She sat in the middle between us, like she'd done this setup before. The first few minutes were polite. We made small talk about work, the restaurant, normal stuff. Her husband barely spoke, mostly just listened, and nodded occasionally. She was the one doing all the talking. She said she and him had been committed partners for 3 years, but their relationship was non-physical. She said they had a spiritual contract, not a romantic one. I must have looked confused because she started explaining it in detail. She said they got legally married for energy alignment and to create life stability. She said they don't live together or do anything romantic, but that their connection is deeper than societal labels. She said she dates other people for emotional intimacy, but saves physical intimacy and cohabitation for her legal commitment. That's when it hit me. I was the emotional side of this arrangement, potentially. She said she always brings her husband on first dates so everyone can start honestly. She said people tend to perform differently when they know they're being observed by someone important. Her husband smiled slightly when she said that, like he was used to being called important. I tried to keep my composure. I asked what exactly she was looking for. She said she wanted to build an emotional ecosystem. She said it was her way of expanding love without corruption. She said most men only want transactional connection, but she wanted someone who could nourish her heart while her husband maintained her body's balance. I didn't know what any of that meant. I just nodded like I understood. She asked me about my previous relationships, but not in the usual way. She wanted to know how I handle emotional emergencies. She asked how I regulate conflict, how much time I spend self-reflecting, and whether I'd ever practiced attachment detox. When I said I didn't know what that was, she smiled and said it was fine. She could teach me. Meanwhile, her husband just sat there, silently eating his food, occasionally writing something in a small notebook he had with him. I caught him looking at me a few times, but not in a hostile way, more like he was studying me. Every time our eyes met, he'd nod slightly and then go back to writing. When the waiter brought drinks, she said they had a rule that only she could order alcohol. Her husband didn't drink, and she said it was energetically disruptive for men to drink on first meetings. I laughed awkwardly, but she didn't. She sipped her wine and said alcohol was her emotional lubricant, not a recreational thing. Then she leaned in and told me she'd been with her husband long enough to know his soul completely, and now she was searching for her mirror energy. She said she'd been on a few other dates lately, but I had the right frequency. Her husband cleared his throat when she said that, and she smiled at him like she was reassuring him. It was clear this wasn't just about her feelings. It was something they'd both participated in. She said she lets her husband help vet people she dates to ensure spiritual alignment. At that point, it didn't feel like a date anymore. It felt like an interview for a job I didn't apply for. The strangest part came toward the end. She asked if I'd be willing to go on a solo assessment outing with her husband the following weekend. She said it wasn't romantic, just a compatibility exercise. She said he's better at sensing energy dissonance and can tell if someone will emotionally integrate with their dynamic. I tried to laugh it off, but she wasn't joking. She said most people get nervous, but it's all part of the system. I told her I'd think about it, which was the only way I could politely end the night. When the bill came, her husband paid for all 3 meals without even asking. She thanked him softly, then looked at me and said they don't split checks because it disrupts flow. Walking out, she hugged me goodbye like we were old friends. She said she'd message me the next day with next steps. I got home still trying to process everything. I texted a friend about it, half laughing as I told the story, but deep down it felt more unsettling than funny. Sure enough, the next morning I woke up to a message from her. It wasn't a normal text, it was a full paragraph. She thanked me for being present and said her husband had recorded positive impressions. She said she'd like to schedule a bonding session where we'd all meditate together and share emotional reflections. I didn't respond. An hour later, her husband messaged me from his own account. He said it was important to complete the emotional circuit and asked for my availability. That's when I blocked both of them. About a week later, I got a new message from a number I didn't recognize. It said, "You're missing your chance for balance." I ignored it, but a few days after that, I saw Lauren again, by accident. I was at a bookstore downtown, and she was there with the same guy. They were standing by the self-help section, holding hands. She saw me, smiled, and waved like nothing weird had ever happened. Her husband turned to look at me too, then leaned over and whispered something to her. She laughed softly and said something back. Then they both just turned and walked away together, perfectly in sync. I left without buying anything. I haven't heard from them since, but I still wonder sometimes what would happen if I'd said yes to that assessment outing. Ethan didn't text like a normal person. His messages were full sentences, no emojis, and he always ended them with periods, like he was writing reports instead of conversations. He said he worked in information integrity, which I thought meant cybersecurity or something like that. His profile picture looked normal, dark hair, clean shirt, glasses. He looked logical, the kind of guy who double-checks everything twice. That didn't seem like a bad thing at first. We started chatting on Thursday night. He didn't waste time on small talk. He asked what kind of phone I used, how often I updated my apps, if I had location services turned on. I thought he was just being nerdy about tech. Then he asked if I'd ever had my identity stolen. I said no, and he replied, "Good. Keep it that way." I laughed and said I'd try. He didn't laugh back. He asked to meet up that weekend. He said he didn't like bars or loud places because noise interferes with accuracy. I said we could grab dinner somewhere quiet. He picked a steakhouse and said he'd make the reservation himself to avoid any data entry mistakes. When I got there, he was already waiting in the lobby, sitting perfectly straight, his hands folded on the table beside a small black notebook. He stood up, greeted me by my full name, and said he liked to confirm identities in person before proceeding with any social investment. That word choice should have made me leave right away, but I just smiled awkwardly. He wasn't rude, just intense. He didn't blink much, and when he talked, it was like every word had been rehearsed. We sat down, and he immediately took out his phone and opened some kind of notes app. He said he liked to log real-time behavioral data. At first, dinner was fine. He asked the usual questions, but he worded them in weird ways. Instead of asking what I did for fun, he said, "What do you do to reset cognitive fatigue?" Instead of asking about my job, he said, "How would you quantify your work output in a typical week?" He was analyzing everything like I was a case study. Halfway through the meal, the conversation shifted. He started talking about risk mitigation and human connection. He said he didn't believe in vibes or intuition, that those things were unreliable. He said he only trusted data. Then he told me he had a personal system for filtering people. I asked what that meant, and he said he never pays for a first date unless the woman passes his screening process. I laughed because I thought he was joking, but he wasn't. He said the screening included a background check, a short questionnaire, and a urine test. He said it like it was completely normal. I told him it sounded like something from a medical clinic, not a date, but he didn't even flinch. He said he wasn't judging, it was just risk management. He said too many people hide undesirable patterns, and data never lies. He said people can fake emotions, but they can't fake urine. I didn't know what to say. He went on to explain that he used to be too trusting, but after getting burned a few times, he made his own system. He said every serious relationship he'd had since then started with data collection. He said one woman refused and got angry, and that proved the system works. Then he reached into his bag and pulled out a folded packet of papers and a small plastic cup. He placed both on the table like this was just part of the dinner routine. I froze. He said the papers were consent forms. He said I could take the test now or schedule it for later, but he wouldn't cover the bill until I did. I thought about walking out right then, but he was sitting directly across from me, calm, watching my reaction closely like he was studying me. He said there was no pressure, but his tone didn't match his words. He said this was just the first phase. He started listing what the test would check for: drugs, medications, hormone levels, even hydration. He said he had benchmarks for compatibility and that the urine test was only part of it. He said if I passed, the next phase was data sharing, which meant access to personal files and financial transparency. I told him I wasn't comfortable with that. He nodded slowly and said that was a common red flag. He wrote something down in his notebook. I asked what he was writing, and he said, "Non-compliance score." I stood up, trying to end things politely. He looked up at me and said he respected my decision, but warned that walking away without closure could lead to misinterpretations. I didn't even respond. I just grabbed my bag and left. When I got outside, I realized my hands were shaking. It was one of those moments where you don't process what just happened until later. I called my friend as soon as I got to my car, told her everything, and we both laughed about it, but it didn't feel funny. It felt like I just dodged something off. That night, he texted me saying it was unfortunate the process ended early. He said if I changed my mind, I could reschedule my screening. He even attached a link to what looked like an online form with my name already typed in at the top. I didn't click it. I just blocked him. 2 days later, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line said, "Pending evaluation." The message said, "You have an incomplete data file. Please verify before deletion." I deleted it immediately. Then I got a second email, this time from what looked like a company name, something like Human Integrity Systems. It said I'd been marked as unverified in a private database. It had my first name, the restaurant name, and the date of our dinner. I panicked. I searched the company name, but nothing came up. No website, no phone number, nothing. It felt fake, but the fact it had that much detail freaked me out. I thought about reporting it, but didn't know what to even say. A week later, one of my coworkers said someone called the office asking to verify my employment. When she asked who it was, The caller said they were conducting a behavioral audit. She hung up, but that's when I realized Ethan must have been trying to run some kind of background check on me himself. I changed my number after that. I even switched my social media to private, deleted my dating apps, everything. About a month later, I got a message request on Facebook from a blank account. The message said, Phase 2 is always optional, but avoidance skews the results. I blocked it without replying, but I still wonder what Phase 2 even was. Sometimes when I think about that dinner, I remember how calm he was, how certain. Like this wasn't about dating for him, it was an experiment, and I wasn't a person to him, just another piece of data to collect. Chelsea had that kind of confidence that makes people do what she wants before realizing they're doing it. Her profile was full of travel photos, big sunglasses, and captions that sounded like inside jokes with herself. She wrote that she liked complicated people and that she thrived in chaos. I probably should have taken that as a warning, but I didn't. She seemed funny and unpredictable in a way that made her stand out. We talked for about a week before meeting. She texted late at night, sent random voice notes, and once called me at 2 a.m. just to ask what color she should paint her nails. I figured she was just quirky, not unstable. When I asked what kind of first date she wanted, she said she didn't care as long as it wasn't boring or predictable. I suggested a rooftop bar downtown, and she agreed right away. When I got there, she was already sitting at the bar drinking something pink. She looked more intense in person, same confidence, but with this constant smirk that never fully left her face. She stood up to hug me, and right away she said she liked that I looked emotionally neutral. I didn't even know what that meant. I just laughed it off. The first half hour was actually normal. We talked about work, movies, and random stuff. She was sharp and funny, but something about the way she talked made every sentence sound like a setup for something else. She asked weirdly specific questions, like if I'd ever helped someone hide a secret or if I considered myself loyal to a fault. I joked that I wasn't applying for a job, but she didn't laugh. She just nodded and said she needed to know before we got to the serious part. She finished her drink, waved the bartender for another, and leaned in closer. That's when she dropped it. She said she wanted to tell me something honest, but that I couldn't judge her. I thought it was going to be something like she still lived with an ex or was seeing other people, which wouldn't have been a big deal. But no. She said she was secretly engaged. I just sat there trying to process it. Before I could even ask, she said she was actually engaged to two different men. One lived in Chicago, the other in Texas. She said both of them thought they were the only one, and both weddings were planned within a month of each other. She said it so calmly, like it was just a regular dating problem. Then she took a sip of her drink and said she was here tonight because she needed an outsider's opinion on who to ghost. I asked if she was serious, and she said completely. She said she'd narrowed it down but couldn't decide. She wanted someone who didn't know either of them to help her make an objective decision. That's when she said she picked me because I gave off emotionally neutral energy. She said she could tell from my messages that I didn't overreact to things. Then she started explaining everything like it was some kind of twisted science experiment. She said one fiancé was dependable but boring, and the other was passionate but unpredictable. She said she loved both of them for different reasons, but she didn't want to cancel their wedding until she was sure which man would handle betrayal better. She said she planned to ghost the weaker one right before the ceremony and vanish. I thought maybe she was drunk or joking, but her eyes were locked on mine and steady, focused. She pulled out her phone and started showing me pictures. There were selfies of her with both men, different rings on her finger in each one. She had folders labeled with their names. One of them had notes beneath each photo, things like good with my mom and suspicious lately. Then she asked if I wanted to see their texts. She scrolled through messages where she said, I can't wait to marry you to both of them within the same day. She looked proud of it, like it was some kind of balancing act. I asked her why she was even doing this, and she said it wasn't about love. It was about proving she could. She said people underestimate how much control you can have if you stay calm and keep your stories straight. She said most people fold under pressure, but she doesn't. Then she leaned closer and asked if I thought I'd be good under pressure. I didn't know what to say. She smiled and said she could tell I would. She said I had observer energy, and that's exactly what she needed tonight. She wanted me to listen while she read messages from both fiancés and tell her which one sounded more emotionally stable. Before I could even respond, she started reading them out loud, word for word, like we were reviewing case studies. One man texted about picking up their marriage license. The other texted about booking their honeymoon. She kept switching between screens so fast it was dizzying. She laughed sometimes, saying how similar they were, like they were versions of each other in alternate timelines. Then she asked if I'd ever disappeared on someone completely. I said no. She said I was ashamed because there's power in the vanish. She started explaining how she'd been practicing, deleting social media every few months, rotating numbers, using burner emails. She said once she picked which man to leave, she'd go dark. She said it wasn't cruel, it was an emotional cleanse. At this point, I was just trying to figure out how to leave without making her suspicious. She was unpredictable, and the way she stared at me felt more like she was testing my reactions than actually talking. When the bill came, she didn't even look at it. She just said I should pay because energy exchange is important. I didn't argue. I handed the waiter my card, hoping it would speed things up. As we stood outside, she asked if I wanted to come with her somewhere. I said I had to get home, but she said it would only take a few minutes. She said she wanted to make one last call before she decided which man to ghost and needed someone emotionally neutral to sit beside her while she did it. I told her I had to go, and her smile disappeared for the first time. She said, "It's okay, I already know which one." Then she turned her phone around. The screen showed a contact labeled Fiancé number 2. She hit call, let it ring twice, then blocked the number mid-ring. She said, "That's closure," and walked away. I stood there for a second, half expecting her to turn back, but she didn't. She just got into a black car and drove off. A week later, I got a message from an unknown number. It said, "You were right to stay calm. He took it worse than expected." I didn't respond. 2 months later, I was scrolling through local news when I saw her name in a short article. It said a woman named Chelsea had been questioned after disappearing right before her wedding in Chicago. The fiancé told police she'd gone missing after a family dinner. They found her car abandoned near an airport, but no sign of her. There was no mention of a second engagement. Alex had that quiet confidence that makes people think he's harmless. His profile was clean and simple. Photos of him in business clothes. Short captions about leadership books and fitness, nothing crazy. He messaged me first, saying he liked people who take structure seriously. I didn't really get what that meant, but he looked normal enough, so I replied. Our conversations were fine, a little robotic maybe, but he was polite. He said he didn't like small talk and preferred efficient conversations. I thought that was just his personality. He picked a restaurant for our first date, one of those upscale places where the lights are dim and everyone talks too softly. When I got there, he was already sitting down with his phone face down on the table. He stood up when I approached, smiled once, and asked if I was usually late to things. I was only 2 minutes late. I laughed it off, but he didn't laugh back. He just nodded and said punctuality mattered to him. Dinner was uncomfortable from the start. He barely looked at the menu before ordering for both of us. He said it was easier that way. He asked about my job, my habits, what time I wake up every morning. Then he started asking about rules. If I followed them growing up, if I liked having them, if I felt more at peace when other people made decisions for me. The questions got stranger as the meal went on. He asked how I'd react if someone told me to do something I didn't agree with. He asked if I thought obedience and loyalty were the same thing. He said people today had forgotten how to submit to structure. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just smiled awkwardly. After dinner, he asked if I wanted to stop by his place for coffee. Normally, I wouldn't, but he hadn't done anything outright weird yet, just off. And he lived close by, so I agreed. His apartment was spotless. Not in a cozy way, but in a calculated, almost staged way. Every item was symmetrical. Even the books on his shelf were arranged by size and color. There were no personal photos anywhere. He asked me to sit on the couch while he made coffee. Then he brought out 2 mugs, set them down, and said before we continued the night there was something important he wanted to do. He said he always gives people a compatibility test. I thought he was joking, but he was already pulling a folder out of a drawer. Inside were printed pages full of questions, hundreds of them, numbered, with boxes for answers. He handed me a pen and said he'd only continue seeing someone if they scored above a 90th percentile in obedience. I laughed, thinking it was sarcasm, but his expression didn't change. He said it very calmly, like this was just how he did things. The test looked like something out of a research lab. Each question had 5 answer options, ranging from strongly disagree to strongly agree. The questions started normal, stuff about reliability, honesty, patience. But then they got strange. They asked things like, do you feel at ease when someone else takes control? And would you rather follow than lead if it meant harmony? Halfway through, I realized none of it was funny. He wasn't messing around. He sat across from me, arms crossed, watching me fill it out. Every few seconds, he'd tilt his head slightly, like he was studying my expressions. When I hesitated on one of the questions, he said time management was part of the assessment and that I shouldn't overthink. He said the subconscious answers were the most revealing. His tone was calm but firm, like a teacher scolding a student quietly. I finished it as fast as I could, just wanting to leave. He took the pages from me immediately and started going through them with a red pen. He didn't even need a calculator. He added the numbers by hand, muttering softly as he went. Then he paused, tapped the page, and sighed. He said my score was 82. I asked what that meant, and he said it meant I was borderline untrainable. He said most people scored low these days because they were too conditioned to think they had choices. He told me that structure is love, and that obedience is the purest form of peace. He talked like he rehearsed those lines before. Then he stood up and said he was ending the night early because it wasn't going to work out. I thought he was kidding again, but he walked over to the front door and opened it. He said failure was part of growth, but that he didn't believe in forcing chemistry. He called me disqualified. I didn't say anything. I just grabbed my bag and left. He didn't even say goodbye. When I got home, I kept thinking about that test, how detailed it was. It didn't look like something he made up. It looked printed from somewhere official. I Googled a few of the questions I remembered, but nothing came up. Then I searched obedience test percentile relationship and found a few odd forums where people talked about behavioral hierarchies and self-reprogramming through partner dynamics. Some of the posts used the same phrases he'd said, things like structure is love and obedience brings harmony. It was all under usernames that looked like codes. I didn't think much of it after that. I blocked his number and moved on. But about a week later, I got a message on Instagram from an account I didn't recognize. It said, 82 isn't permanent. You can improve. The profile had no picture, no posts, just that message. I ignored it, but the next day I got another one. Most people resist what they need most. Then another, you left before we started the second phase. I blocked that account too, but a few days later, I saw a new follower request from an account named Obedience90. The profile picture was just a white circle on a black background. The bio said, only the disciplined are free. It freaked me out. I deleted my Instagram for a while, but sometimes I still get random follow requests with names that look too similar, different numbers, same theme. I always block them, but I can't help thinking he's still sending them. The strangest part is that I told a friend about it months later, and she said she actually recognized him. She said she went on a date with someone who also made her take a quiz, though she said hers was about emotional compliance. Same description, calm voice, clean apartment, perfect posture. She said he never called it a test, just an evaluation. I don't know what he's really doing with those results, or if it's part of something bigger. Maybe it's some weird self-help group, or maybe he's just collecting data. All I know is that somewhere my answers are sitting in a folder on his shelf, red pen marks and all, and the thought of that still makes my stomach turn. Nina seemed completely normal when we matched. She had a bright smile, messy hair, and one of those profiles full of nature photos, hiking, farmers markets, and some caption about simple living. She texted like she talked fast, full of energy but a little scattered. She said she liked people who were real, which usually means they're unpredictable, but I was bored and said sure when she asked if I wanted to grab brunch on Sunday. She picked the place, a small countryside cafe about 20 minutes outside the city. The kind of spot that smells like pancakes and has too many plants inside. I got there a bit early, ordered a coffee, and waited near the window. She texted saying she was parking, so I looked up when I saw a car pull in. She got out first, then another door opened, and an older woman stepped out right behind her. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. Maybe she was dropping someone off. But they walked in together. Nina waved and said sorry for running late, and then she introduced her mom like it was the most casual thing in the world. Her mom smiled, said it was so lovely to finally meet me, and slid into the booth before I could process what was happening. I thought maybe it was some kind of misunderstanding, like her mom had just tagged along for a ride or something, but no. She started taking out reading glasses and a notepad. That's when I realized this wasn't brunch, it was an interview. The first few minutes were awkward but polite. Nina's mom asked about my job, where I grew up, and what kind of neighborhood I live in now. I tried to keep it light, answering normally, hoping maybe she'd excuse herself soon. But she didn't. She just kept going, flipping through her notes like she had a list prepared. Then the questions got weird. She asked how many siblings I had, and when I said 2, she leaned forward and asked how fertile they were. I laughed because I thought it was a joke, but she didn't laugh back. She said family fertility can sometimes skip generations, and that it was an important factor for her daughter's future. I looked at Nina, waiting for her to step in, but she just smiled at me like she was proud of her mom for asking. Her mom moved on before I could even respond. She asked my blood type, then whether I believed in vaccines. Then she started talking about natural births, saying hospitals were unnatural spaces that disrupt divine energy. She said she and Nina both planned to have their grandchildren born under the sky, close to the soil. I had no idea what to say. I just nodded awkwardly, trying not to make eye contact with anyone in the cafe because I could feel people staring. It didn't stop there. Her mom pulled out a small binder and started flipping through it. It was full of charts, graphs, and handwritten notes. She said she'd been tracking family health traits and wanted to make sure Nina's future partner aligned biologically. She asked me if I had ever had dental braces because she didn't want weak jawlines in her bloodline. She even asked about allergies, sleep patterns, and my resting heart rate. Every answer I gave, she wrote something down. It wasn't just casual conversation. She was genuinely recording data. Nina sat there the whole time, smiling, occasionally chiming in with things like, "Isn't she amazing?" or "Mom's just thorough." When the food arrived, her mom said we continue eating in silence because digestion was a sacred process. I looked at Nina again, but she just nodded like this was completely normal. I tried to eat, but the tension made it impossible. Her mom didn't even touch her plate. She was staring at me the whole time, occasionally scribbling something down in her notes. After a while, she asked if I'd ever considered home birthing in the woods. She said hospitals were for the weak, and real men stand by their partners under the stars. I almost laughed out loud, but the look on her face made me stop. She was serious. She said Nina came from a line of Earth mothers, and that modern medicine had corrupted the sacred bond of pain and birth. Then she asked if I'd be comfortable raising a child without modern technology. She said screens steal the soul. Nina nodded in agreement and said she wanted her future kids to grow up, feral but free. At that point, I was just trying to make it through the meal. I kept thinking maybe they were testing me for some kind of reality show or prank, but it didn't feel fake. Her mom's intensity was too real. When the check came, Nina's mom grabbed it before I could. She said a man shouldn't pay until he's proven stable enough to provide. She said paying early creates false dominance. I just said okay and let her handle it. As we walked outside, I thought that was the end of it. I said it was nice meeting them and that I had to get going. But her mom asked if I could follow them somewhere quick. She said she wanted to show me something important. Against my better judgment, I followed them in my car. They drove about 5 minutes down a dirt road and pulled over near a clearing surrounded by trees. It wasn't a park, just empty land with a wooden shed in the distance. Her mom said this was their family ground. She pointed to the shed and said it was where the future births will happen. I didn't even ask what that meant. She started talking about ritual renewal, birth circles, and blood soil. Nina just stood there holding her mom's arm like this was completely normal. I said I had to go because I had work early the next morning. Her mom nodded slowly and said she appreciated my compliance. She told me she'd be in touch after she'd reviewed my file. I didn't even ask how she had a file. I drove home in silence, trying to convince myself I'd misread everything. But the next day I had a message from Nina. She said her mom really liked me and wanted to know if I'd be open to attending their next family orientation. I didn't reply. A few hours later, her mom emailed me. I don't know how she got my address, but the subject line said, "Your compatibility results." The message was full of medical-sounding terms and percentages, all broken down into categories like paternal viability, genetic stability, and resilience under lunar pressure. At the bottom it said, "Status probationary mate." I blocked both of them. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. Inside was a single photo. Me sitting at the cafe table, mid-bite, clearly taken from across the room. Underneath it, in neat handwriting, it said, "You scored highest in jaw symmetry. Don't waste the lineage." I never went back to that cafe again. Vanessa was one of those people who talked like every sentence meant something deeper. She messaged me first on a dating app, saying I had a kind eyes. I thought it was a weird thing to say, but she seemed genuine, so I replied. She told me right away that she didn't use dating apps much and that she believed everything happens in divine order. Normally, that kind of talk would throw me off, but she had this calm, almost hypnotic way of typing, like she was too sure of what she was saying to question. We talked for about a week before meeting. She said she wanted our first date to be somewhere peaceful, not crowded. I suggested a coffee shop, but she said no, she knew the perfect spot. I didn't ask too many questions. I thought maybe she meant a park or a beach or something quiet like that. When I picked her up, she was already waiting outside her apartment, holding a small folded piece of paper in her hand. She was dressed nice, but not like someone going on a normal date. She wore a black dress with a white cardigan and had her hair tied up neatly. She smiled when she saw me, but it wasn't the kind of smile people give when they're excited. It was slow, like she was remembering something. She said she wanted to drive instead, so I let her. We got in her car, and she started driving without telling me where we were going. She had old music playing, like from the 70s, and kept glancing over at me in between lyrics. It got awkward fast, so I tried to start a conversation. She asked me weirdly specific questions, stuff like what time I was born, if I'd ever lost someone important, and if I believed in soul transference. I didn't even know what that meant, so I just said maybe. We drove for about 20 minutes before she turned down a long road lined with trees. That's when I saw the sign, Greenfield Memorial Cemetery. I laughed a little because I thought maybe she was joking, but she didn't laugh. She parked near the middle of the cemetery and turned off the car. She said she knew it might seem strange, but that she wanted to share something intimate and healing. Before I could ask what she meant, she grabbed that folded piece of paper from her lap and got out of the car. She started walking through the rows of headstones like she knew exactly where she was going. I followed her, not knowing what else to do. The air was heavy, cold, and the ground was damp from earlier rain. She stopped in front of one grave, a simple stone with the name Ethan Miles, 1994 to 2020. She stood there quietly for a moment, then turned to me and said I reminded her of him. I thought she meant personality-wise or something innocent like that. Then she said it, her late fiancé. She said Ethan had died suddenly 3 years ago and that she hadn't dated anyone since. She said when she saw a profile, something clicked. She said she felt this strange connection, like she already knew me. I didn't know what to say. Then she unfolded the paper. It was a poem, written in neat handwriting. She said she had written it for me, or maybe for him, and she wasn't sure which anymore. Before I could process that, she asked me to do her a favor. She said she wanted me to read it out loud to the grave. I froze. I thought she was joking again, but she wasn't smiling. She said she believed souls can come back in new bodies, that sometimes the universe brings people back to finish what they couldn't before. She said she needed to hear his voice again through me. I didn't know what to do. I tried laughing it off, but she didn't move. She just held the paper out like this was something she'd already decided I was going to do. Her eyes looked glassy, like she wasn't fully there. So I took the paper. My hands were shaking. The poem was short but strange. It talked about unfinished promises, about returning through familiar eyes, and finding love twice in the same lifetime. The handwriting was perfect, like she'd written it more than once. I read it out loud, my voice cracking halfway through. She watched me the entire time, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she closed her eyes and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then she smiled again, that same slow, heavy smile. She said it felt right, that she could feel Ethan listening. I wanted to leave, but she wasn't done. She reached out and brushed my cheek with her hand, saying it was just like his. I stepped back, try and make it seem casual, but she noticed. Her smile faded, and she said maybe I wasn't ready yet. I didn't know what that meant, and I didn't want to find out. I told her I had to go because I had an early shift the next morning. She nodded, calm again, like nothing had happened. On the way back to the car, she said she hoped I'd stay open. I didn't ask what that meant either. The drive back was silent. She didn't play any music this time. She just stared straight ahead. When we got to my place, she said thank you for being present. She didn't ask for another date, but before I could even unbuckle, she reached into her bag and handed me a small envelope. She said not to open it until I felt ready. I didn't open it for a few days. When I finally did, there was a photo inside, a black and white picture of her and a man who looked disturbingly like me. Not exactly the same, but enough that I had to stare at it for a minute. Same hair color, similar face shape, even the same height judging by the way they stood together. On the back of the photo, she'd written 2018, or forever. I blocked her after that. But 2 weeks later, I got a message from a new account. It said, "It's strange how souls find each other again, isn't it?" I didn't reply. A few months later, I drove past that cemetery by accident. The sky was clear, and I saw a single car parked near the same area where we stood that night. A woman was kneeling by a grave holding something. I couldn't tell if it was her, but I didn't stop to check. Sometimes I still think about that poem, the way it said, "When I return, let me know me again." Vanessa was one of those people who talked like every sentence meant something deeper. She messaged me first on a dating app, saying I had a kind eyes. I thought it was a weird thing to say, but she seemed genuine, so I replied. She told me right away that she didn't use dating apps much and that she believed everything happens in divine order. Normally, that kind of talk would throw me off, but she had this calm, almost hypnotic way of typing, like she was too sure of what she was saying to question. We talked for about a week before meeting. She said she wanted our first date to be somewhere peaceful, not crowded. I suggested a coffee shop, but she said no, she knew the perfect spot. I didn't ask too many questions. I thought maybe she meant a park or a beach or something quiet like that. When I picked her up, she was already waiting outside her apartment, holding a small folded piece of paper in her hand. She was dressed nice, but not like someone going on a normal date. She wore a black dress with a white cardigan and had her hair tied up neatly. She smiled when she saw me, but it wasn't the kind of smile people give when they're excited. It was slow, like she was remembering something. She said she wanted to drive instead, so I let her. We got in her car, and she started driving without telling me where we were going. She had old music playing, like from the 70s, and kept glancing over at me in between lyrics. It got awkward fast, so I tried to start a conversation. She asked me weirdly specific questions, stuff like what time I was born, if I'd ever lost someone important, and if I believed in soul transference. I didn't even know what that meant, so I just said maybe. We drove for about 20 minutes before she turned down a long road lined with trees. That's when I saw the sign, Greenfield Memorial Cemetery. I laughed a little because I thought maybe she was joking, but she didn't laugh. She parked near the middle of the cemetery and turned off the car. She said she knew it might seem strange, but that she wanted to share something intimate and healing. Before I could ask what she meant, she grabbed that folded piece of paper from her lap and got out of the car. She started walking through the rows of headstones like she knew exactly where she was going. I followed her, not knowing what else to do. The air was heavy, cold, and the ground was damp from earlier rain. She stopped in front of one grave, a simple stone with the name Ethan Miles, 1994 to 2020. She stood there quietly for a moment, then turned to me and said I reminded her of him. I thought she meant personality-wise or something innocent like that. Then she said it, her late fiancé. She said Ethan had died suddenly 3 years ago and that she hadn't dated anyone since. She said when she saw a profile, something clicked. She said she felt this strange connection, like she already knew me. I didn't know what to say. Then she unfolded the paper. It was a poem, written in neat handwriting. She said she had written it for me, or maybe for him, and she wasn't sure which anymore. Before I could process that, she asked me to do her a favor. She said she wanted me to read it out loud to the grave. I froze. I thought she was joking again, but she wasn't smiling. She said she believed souls can come back in new bodies, that sometimes the universe brings people back to finish what they couldn't before. She said she needed to hear his voice again through me. I didn't know what to do, I tried laughing it off, but she didn't move. She just held the paper out like this was something she'd already decided I was going to do. Her eyes looked glassy, like she wasn't fully there. So I took the paper. My hands were shaking. The poem was short but strange. It talked about unfinished promises, about returning through familiar eyes, and finding love twice in the same lifetime. The handwriting was perfect, like she'd written it more than once. I read it out loud, my voice cracking halfway through. She watched me the entire time, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she closed her eyes and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then she smiled again, that same slow, heavy smile. She said it felt right, that she could feel Ethan listening. I wanted to leave, but she wasn't done. She reached out and brushed my cheek with her hand, saying it was just like his. I stepped back, trying to make it seem casual, but she noticed. Her smile faded, and she said maybe I wasn't ready yet. I didn't know what that meant, and I didn't want to find out. I told her I had to go because I had an early shift the next morning. She nodded, calm again, like nothing had happened. On the way back to the car, she said she hoped I'd stay open. I didn't ask what that meant either. The drive back was silent. She didn't play any music this time. She just stared straight ahead. When we got to my place, she said thank you for being present. She didn't ask for another date, but before I could even unbuckle, she reached into her bag and handed me a small envelope. She said not to open it until I felt ready. I didn't open it for a few days. When I finally did, there was a photo inside, a black and white picture of her and a man who looked disturbingly like me. Not exactly the same, but enough that I had to stare at it for a minute. Same hair color, similar face shape, even the same height judging by the way they stood together. On the back of the photo, she'd written 2018, or forever. I blocked her after that. But 2 weeks later, I got a message from a new account. It said, "It's strange how souls find each other again, isn't it?" I didn't reply. A few months later, I drove past that cemetery by accident. The sky was clear, and I saw a single car parked near the same area where we stood that night. A woman was kneeling by a grave holding something. I couldn't tell if it was her, but I didn't stop to check. Sometimes I still think about that poem, the way it said, "When I return, let me know me again." Jenna was the kind of girl who made everything sound like a challenge. The way she texted had this rhythm to it. Short, teasing sentences like she was always a step ahead. She wasn't on any normal dating app either. I met her through Instagram after she commented on one of my photos. She said she liked my haircut. It was random but flattering, and we started talking in DMs after that. She was different from the start. No small talk, no fake energy. She asked straight up questions about things like how I handle pressure, what my biggest regret was, what I'd do if someone lied to me. It felt intense, but I kind of liked that she wasn't like everyone else who just said, "What you doing?" She said she wanted to grab food somewhere with dark lighting and no fake smiles. I didn't really know what that meant, but I agreed anyway. We picked a restaurant downtown. One of those trendy ones where they serve food on black plates and everyone's pretending to be important. When I walked in, she was already at the bar sipping on something clear. She waved me over, and I remember thinking she looked completely different from her pictures, sharper somehow. Her face didn't give much away, but her eyes didn't blink much either. The first few minutes were actually good. She had that confidence that makes you feel like she's letting you in on something secret. She talked about her job, or what I thought was her job, because she kept switching between marketing and psych research. I couldn't tell if she was serious or just playing around. Then the waiter came to take our order, and while we waited for food, she started scrolling through her phone. She told me she had something funny to show me. I leaned over, expecting a meme or something harmless. Instead, she opened an Instagram page that didn't have her name on it. The username was just a random mix of letters and numbers. The profile picture was a blurry photo of a mirror. It was private, but she was logged in, so I could see everything. The first thing I noticed was the feed. Every post was of a guy. Different angles, different settings, some at restaurants, some in cars. One even looked like it was taken while someone was sleeping. Each photo had a caption with numbers underneath it. She scrolled down casually, explaining that it was her side project. She said she rates every guy she goes out with. Each one had categories written in the captions: jawline strength, eye sincerity, verbal control, emotional manipulability. The last one made me pause. She said she'd been doing it for over a year, that it helped her collect data. She even had a highlight section named Leaderboard. It ranked the top 5 guys based on what she called their influence potential. It looked like a competition no one knew they were part of. Then she scrolled up and said, "Oh, and you're already on it." There were 3 posts of me. One was a photo of me waiting outside the restaurant earlier, looking at my phone. Another was my hand on the table next to my drink. The third was a close-up of my face mid-laugh, clearly taken without me realizing it. Each post had the same rating categories, but the captions were filled out. For jawline strength, she'd given me an 8. For confidence posture, a 7. For emotional manipulability, a 6, with a note underneath that said, "Still evaluating possible late-stage deflection tendencies." I felt my stomach drop. She smiled like it was no big deal, saying she liked keeping track of how people acted when they didn't know they were being observed. She said it taught her a lot about patterns. I asked why she was showing me, and she said she wanted to see how I'd react. I didn't know if I should laugh or walk out. I tried asking if anyone else knew about this, and she said no one ever finds out. She said she's careful. She blurs out locations and names before posting. Apparently, none of the guys ever suspected because she mixes in random aesthetic photos to make the page look like an art account. She started explaining her system like it was scientific. She said she tracks how long it takes each guy to make certain moves, touching her hand, asking personal questions, offering to pay. She said the faster they do those things, the higher their compliance score. It wasn't said as a joke. She really meant it. At one point, she mentioned how one guy noticed her taking pictures and confronted her. She said she blocked him and then added his name to her uncooperative list. She even showed me that list in her notes app. It had over 20 names, some with comments like too defensive, self-aware, or fake humility. When our food came, she barely ate. She just kept watching me while I tried to act normal. I was hyper-aware of every move I made. I started wondering if she was still recording me. My eyes kept darting toward her phone on the table. She must have noticed because she smiled and said she'd already gotten what she needed. She said she could tell by my body language that I was type C, the kind that tries to maintain control when they feel observed. She said I was interesting, not because I was charming, but because I was calculating. I didn't know how to respond to that. She leaned back, still studying me like I was some experiment. Then she said something that made it worse. She said most of the guys she rated never made it past phase 1, but I might make it to phase 2. When I asked what that meant, she said phase 2 was when she starts following them around after the date to see how they act alone. She said it's the most honest version of people, how they behave when they think no one's watching. I told her I needed to go. She didn't stop me. She just smirked and said I'd probably check her page again later. I didn't respond. When I got home, I blocked her account, but curiosity got the best of me later that night. I searched the fake page again from a different account. It was still public. There were news stories posted, one of a blurred restaurant table, another of a parked car, and one that made my stomach twist. It was a photo of the back of my head, taken from across the parking lot. The caption said, "Phase 2 begins." The next day, the page was gone. Deleted or renamed. I couldn't find it anywhere. I told a few friends about it, but no one believed me at first. They said it sounded made up. But 2 weeks later, a friend texted me saying a girl he met on Instagram and started acting weird, asking about his eye sincerity and taking sneaky photos of him at dinner. He sent me her picture. It was Jenna. When I met Trevor, he came off like one of those people who could charm anyone without even trying. The kind of guy who talks fast, laughs easy, and makes every conversation sound like an inside joke. His dating profile didn't say much. Just a few pictures of him hiking and one of him holding a small golden retriever puppy. That dog photo probably got him half his matches. I like dogs, so it worked on me too. We started texting, and he was funny. He had this sarcastic tone that made it easy to talk to him. He said he wasn't looking for anything serious, which was fine because neither was I. He asked to grab dinner on a Friday night at this diner just outside the city. Nothing fancy, just normal. I like that. When I got there, he was already sitting at a booth with a cup of coffee, smiling like he'd been waiting all day. He stood up when I arrived, hugged me, and started talking immediately. No awkward silence, no word pauses. I actually thought, wow, this might be one of the few normal dates I've had. He asked a lot of questions, not creepy ones, like he was trying to memorize me. My favorite food, where I grew up, random memories. He seemed genuinely interested, and it made me relax. Halfway through the meal, he started telling stories about his life, mostly about his job, his friends, and then his dog, named Bailey. The way he talked about that dog was different, like it was a person. He said his ex had taken Bailey after they broke up, but he was trying to get him back. He talked about missing the dog like you miss family. I felt bad for him. He showed me pictures and videos of Bailey running around the beach, sleeping on the couch, wearing a bandana. He said losing him was worse than the breakup. We finished eating, and he suggested we take a walk to this park nearby. It was cold out, but he insisted. He said it was his favorite spot to clear his head. We walked for a while, talking about random stuff, and then out of nowhere he said something weird. He asked me how long it usually takes for me to tell someone I love them. I laughed because I thought it was a joke. I told him it depends, that it's not exactly something I plan. He nodded, smiling, and said he liked a challenge. I didn't really get what he meant. We sat on a bench near a frozen pond. The air was quiet, just the sound of cars in the distance. He got kind of serious all of a sudden. He said he wanted to be honest about something before the night went any further. I thought he was about to tell me he had a girlfriend or something. But no, he said he had a bet with his ex. A real bet. That if he could get me to say, "I love you," within 2 hours of our first date, he'd win back custody of his dog. I thought he was joking, but his face didn't change. He said it like it was a normal confession, like people make bets like that all the time. I just stared at him, waiting for the punchline. He said his ex thought he'd lost his charm, and that no one would fall for him again, so they made a deal. If he could prove he still had it, by getting a stranger to fall in love with him fast, he'd get Bailey back. I asked why he was telling me, and he said because he didn't want to lie anymore, that he actually liked me and didn't want to use me for the game. I was too stunned to speak. He reached for my hand while saying he didn't mean it in a bad way, that it was just supposed to be fun at first, that he didn't think he'd actually like me. The worst part was how calm he looked while saying all this, like it wasn't the craziest thing I had ever heard. He kept saying he needed the dog back, that Bailey was everything to him. He said his ex was manipulative, that this was the only way to prove something. I stood up trying to end it there, but he followed me as I walked toward the parking lot. He didn't yell or anything, just kept talking in this quiet, pleading voice. He said he didn't want me to think he was crazy, that he just missed his best friend. He asked if I could at least help him finish the night. Pretend, he said, so he could record proof of the date for his ex. I said no, obviously, but he didn't seem to care what I said. He pulled out his phone and started recording, asking me to look into the camera. I turned away, but he kept following, saying he just needed me to say 3 words. I walked faster, and he called after me saying he didn't want to hurt me. He just needed to win. Those words. "I just need to win," stuck in my head for days after. I got to my car, locked the doors, and left. He was still standing there when I drove off, just watching me go. My phone started buzzing a few minutes later with messages from him. He said he was sorry, and it wasn't what it looked like, that his ex had twisted things. Then he sent another saying he'd find another way to prove himself. I didn't respond. 2 days later, I saw a post on a local community page about a guy causing a scene outside an animal shelter. It mentioned a man demanding they release his dog, screaming that his ex had set him up. They said he got taken away by the police for trespassing. I knew it was him because someone posted a photo from their car. The same jacket, the same face. A week later, I checked his profile. It was gone. Like he deleted everything. I thought that was the end of it. But a few weeks later, I got a text from an unknown number. It said, "I lost Bailey. You almost helped me win." That was it. No name, no follow-up. I'd blocked the number right away, but sometimes I think about what he said. The way he looked when he talked about the dog, like it wasn't even about the animal anymore. It was about control. Every now and then, I'll see someone walking a golden retriever that looks like Bailey. I know it's not him, but it always makes me look twice. I met Maya through a mutual friend who swore she was quirky but sweet. I didn't really know what that meant, but I figured it couldn't be worse than the usual dating app disasters. She texted like she was fun, lots of jokes, random stories, kind of mysterious. We talked for a week before meeting up. and she suggested we do something different. I thought that meant a walk somewhere quiet or a random road trip. When she sent me the address, I Googled it and froze. It was a funeral home. I texted her asking if she was serious. She said yes, completely serious. Said she always wanted to go to one just for fun and see what it's like inside. I laughed at first, thinking it was a dark joke, but she doubled down. She said life was too short for boring dates and that I'd understand the vibe when we got there. I probably should have said no, but curiosity beat logic. The day of the date, it was raining. Light drizzle, gray sky, everything dull. I got there early and parked across the street, just watching people walk in and out. Nobody looked sad, which confused me. It didn't seem like an active service was happening. The place looked normal from the outside, white building, trimmed bushes, gold-lettered sign. But there was this heaviness in the air, like even the sound of cars passing by felt quieter near it. Maya showed up late, wearing all black. Not like a morning outfit, more like she was dressed for a concert or something. She smiled when she saw me and said it was perfect weather for this. Her tone was way too cheerful for what we were about to do. We walked in together, and right away the smell hit me. Not bad, just weird, like flowers and cleaning chemicals mixed together. There was no one in the lobby except a man at the front desk wearing a black suit. Maya went straight up to him and said we were just looking around. He didn't even question it. He just nodded politely and told us to keep to the viewing area since the rest of the building was off limits. The walls were covered in framed photos of flowers and angels. Everything was quiet except for the faint hum of air conditioning. I tried to keep it light, joking that this had to be the strangest first date I'd ever been on, but she didn't react. She was looking around like she was actually impressed, studying every corner like it was an art gallery. She stopped at a casket display. They had different types set up: wooden, metal, white, black, some open, some closed. She ran her hand along one of them, tracing the edges with her fingers, and whispered something under her breath that I couldn't catch. Then she asked me if I'd ever thought about what mine would look like. I told her no, trying to laugh it off, but she looked at me seriously and said people should always plan for their exit. Then she asked if I wanted to see the back. I told her no, obviously, because that sounded insane, but she started walking toward the hallway anyway. I followed because I didn't want to get in trouble for leaving her wandering around. We made it a few steps before the funeral director came out of one of the side rooms and asked if we needed help. And that's when Maya looked him straight in the eye and asked if they were hiring. The guy blinked, confused, and asked what position she was looking for. She said she didn't care. She just wanted to see what it feels like to dress a corpse. She said it casually, like someone asking for a restaurant recommendation. My brain froze. I thought she was joking again, but she wasn't even smiling. She said she'd always been curious about what the skin feels like after the fluids, and that she didn't get why people were so scared of death. The man didn't know how to respond. He told her gently that those kinds of positions required specific training and licensing. She nodded thoughtfully, like she was considering a career change. Then she asked if they offered shadowing opportunities. At that point, I stepped in and told her we should go. The director gave me this look that said he agreed. She didn't argue, but she didn't seem embarrassed either. She thanked him like she had just finished a normal job interview, then turned to me and said she was hungry, just like that. We walked out, and the silence between us was so thick it felt like the air itself was pressing down. I tried to change the subject, but she kept bringing it back to what she'd seen inside. She said she found it peaceful, that people made too big a deal out of death, that she thought she'd be good at it because she didn't get grossed out easily. I dropped her off at her place after grabbing takeout, and she thanked me for being open-minded. I went home thinking that was it, that she was just weird, and I'd never see her again. But the next day she messaged me saying she had called the funeral home back. She said they told her there weren't any openings, but she left her number anyway in case something comes up. I didn't respond. She sent another message that night saying she'd had a dream about the quiet room in the back, and that it made her feel calm. I blocked her after that. A few weeks later, I was driving past that same funeral home and noticed police cars parked outside. The local news later said someone had broken in during the night. Nothing was stolen, but a few caskets had been opened. The article said they didn't catch whoever did it. I don't know if it was her, but the thought still crosses my mind sometimes, especially because a few months later, a different funeral home's Facebook page posted about a woman who kept showing up asking to volunteer for body prep. They even included a blurry photo for awareness. The shape of her face looked a lot like Maya, I never confirmed it, and had no plan to. Sometimes curiosity feels like a door you shouldn't open twice. I learned that one the weirdest way possible. I met Kevin on Hinge. He wasn't the usual type I went for, but something about his photos looked sharp and confident. Nice suit, good smile, a kind of easy charm. He said he worked in investment consulting, which didn't mean much to me, but the way he worded things sounded mature. We messaged for a week before he asked to take me out. He said he wanted to go somewhere classy but relaxed, and I remember laughing because I didn't even own heels that matched that description. He picked a hotel bar downtown, the kind that looks like it belongs in a movie. Big marble floors, live piano music, everything smelled like expensive perfume and polished glass. The staff wore black suits that probably cost more than my outfit. I almost turned around when I saw how fancy it was, but then he waved me over from one of the corner tables, all calm and confident like he owned the place. He stood up to greet me, smiled, and pulled my chair out. He was smoother in person than over text. Not loud, not pushy, just that type who seems to know exactly what to say without trying too hard. He ordered for both of us before I could even open the menu. 2 cocktails with some name I didn't recognize. The bartender smiled like they knew him. At first, it felt nice. He talked about travel, business, and how he didn't really do casual dating anymore. He said he preferred intentional connections. That phrase stuck in my head for some reason. He was confident but calm, and he made it sound like he was used to this kind of place. He asked about my job, my hobbies, my goals, like an interview, but in a weirdly hypnotic way. Our drinks arrived. They looked fancy, with flowers and smoke coming off the top. I didn't even want to ask how much they cost. He raised his glass, said something about cheers to new beginnings, and then took a slow sip. I followed. The drink was strong but good. After about 20 minutes, he excused himself to the bathroom. Totally normal. He even left his jacket on the chair, so I didn't think anything of it. I scrolled my phone, took a picture of my drink because it looked nice, then waited. 10 minutes went by. I figured maybe there was a line or something. 15 minutes. I started getting that uneasy feeling. I looked toward the hallway where the bathrooms were, expecting him to walk out any second, but he didn't. The bartender kept glancing over at me, and I could feel people looking. It felt awkward sitting there alone with 2 half-finished drinks. 20 minutes turned into 30. I texted him asking if everything was okay. The message didn't deliver. His profile picture on the app disappeared when I checked. I realized he had unmatched me while still supposedly in the bathroom. I sat there trying to piece together what was happening when the waiter came by and asked if I wanted another round or if we'd be closing the tap. I told him I was waiting for someone. He nodded politely but stayed nearby. A few minutes later, the bartender walked over holding the small leather bill folder and said, "Ma'am, your tab's ready when you are." When I opened it, I actually laughed out loud because I thought it had to be a mistake. The total was over $180 for just the 2 drinks. I told the bartender there must be a mix-up because my date had ordered them. He just gave me this look like he'd heard that line 1,000 times before. He said politely that the tab was under my table number, and since there was no payment on record, it fell to me. I tried explaining again that I was on a date and that the guy hadn't come back, but he just nodded with this tight smile like he knew exactly what had happened. I didn't want to make a scene, so I paid. My card went through, and I felt humiliated. The waiter gave me a small nod that almost looked like pity. When I finally got outside, the air felt heavy. I stood near the hotel doors just staring down the street, hoping maybe I'd see Kevin walking back, but of course he wasn't. I got home angry at myself for falling for something that stupid. I Googled his name later that night just out of curiosity. Nothing. No LinkedIn, no Facebook, no trace. But when I searched Kevin Hotel Date Scam, something came up. It was a post on a local forum from a woman describing almost the exact same story. Different hotel, same setup. She said the guy she met used a different name but matched the same description. Expensive suit, confident, charming, same way of ordering drinks before she could. He had disappeared mid-date too, and she ended up paying over $200. Other women started commenting, saying they'd met someone similar who vanished in the middle of the night after ordering high-end cocktails or champagne. One even said he pretended to take a phone call instead of going to the bathroom. Every story sounded almost identical. Apparently this guy, or maybe multiple guys, rotated around hotel bars downtown pretending to be well off. They charm women into ordering drinks, disappear, and leave them stuck with ridiculous bills. Some bartenders even recognized the trick but couldn't legally intervene since the tab always ended up under the woman's name. The more I read, the worse it got. One woman said she'd seen him weeks later at a different hotel bar, laughing with another date. She took a photo of him and posted it in the comments. My stomach dropped when I saw it. It was Kevin. Same face, same posture, same smug smile. I showed the photo to a friend who used to work in security at one of those hotels. He said the guy's been banned from a few places but always finds new ones to go to. Sometimes he uses fake names or slightly different looks, different facial hair, different hairstyle, but always the same tactic. I thought about reporting it, but there wasn't much to say. It's not technically a crime if someone walks out before the bill arrives. It's just scummy. The only thing I could do was warn people. I commented on that same thread and added my story. A few days later, someone replied saying they'd seen him again, this time at a rooftop bar, doing the exact same thing. A week later, my friend sent me a screenshot from another dating app. It was him again, new name, same photos. His bio said he was looking for genuine women who know their worth. The irony made me sick. Sometimes when I scroll through dating apps, I still think I see him. Maybe it's just my brain noticing similarities, but I'll pause every time I see a guy with that same kind of smile and clean suit. I don't go to hotel bars anymore. It's not fear, just disgust. It's strange how something so small can make you rethink everything about people. One free drink can turn into a bill that stays in your mind way longer than it should. And somewhere out there, I know he's still doing it, probably sitting in another expensive bar right now, waiting for someone else to walk in thinking it's just another harmless first date. I didn't expect much from Lily when we matched. Her profile had one clear selfie, nothing crazy, and a caption that said, "Mom life, take it or leave it." I almost left it, but she looked normal enough and said she liked old movies and pasta. I figured, fine, a chill dinner date wouldn't hurt. I've been on worse ones. We agreed to meet at a small Italian place near the edge of town. It wasn't fancy, but it had decent lighting and real menus instead of QR codes. When I got there, she was already inside. I noticed her right away because she wasn't alone. She had a little toddler sitting in a high chair next to her, smacking a breadstick on the table. I thought maybe she couldn't find a babysitter, which wasn't a big deal, but she didn't mention bringing her kid before. I stood there for a second trying to decide if I should just leave, but she spotted me and waved. She looked a bit different from her photos. Her hair was tied up messy, and she had big tired eyes, like she hadn't slept in days. She smiled though, and that threw me off. It was this big, bright smile that didn't match the heavy look in her eyes. We ordered food and tried to make small talk, but it was awkward. The toddler kept throwing bits of pasta on the floor, and she didn't even flinch. She just kept talking like it was normal. Every few minutes, she'd reach over and wipe the kid's face with a napkin, then go right back to talking about how honesty matters, and some men run away from real responsibility. Halfway through dinner, she leaned forward and said something that froze me. She said she only dates men who are willing to step in immediately. I didn't understand at first. I thought she meant emotionally, like being supportive or whatever. Then she clarified. She said the father of her kid was in jail for stabbing her brother during a barbecue argument. I tried to play it cool, but my brain couldn't process that sentence fast enough. She said it so casually, like she was talking about a bad ex or a parking ticket. She said it happened a few years ago, that it got messy because her brother had it coming. She laughed a little when she said that. I remembered the sound of the fork hitting my plate because I had paused mid-bite. She started telling me details I didn't ask for, like how her ex was really protective and did what had to be done. She said her brother had disrespected her during a family cookout, and her ex couldn't handle it. I was staring at the table while she talked because every sentence just got worse. She said she still visits her ex sometimes because he's the father, and then looked me dead in the eyes and said she doesn't want to be with anyone who'd hesitate to protect her like that. I didn't even know what to say. Her tone changed after that. She got quieter, more serious. She said she's not into playing around, and that her next man needed to understand the stakes. I looked at the toddler, who was now stuffing fries into his mouth and humming to himself, completely unaware. It made everything feel darker. Then she asked me how good I was with kids. I told her I liked them in general, but didn't really have any in my life. She nodded slowly and said, "You'd get used to it," like it was already decided. I wanted to leave right then, but I felt trapped. She wasn't being loud or rude, just unsettling. Her calmness made it worse. She talked about family loyalty and said if she's dating someone, she expects him to live like part of the family from day one. At some point, the waiter came to clear the plates, and she pulled out her phone and showed me photos. Not of her kid, of her ex. She scrolled through them fast, saying things like, "He used to look so handsome before the drugs messed him up." The photos looked like mugshots, all taken at different times. I didn't know what kind of reaction she wanted, so I just nodded. Then she said she thinks he'll be out sooner than they said. That part made me feel sick. I asked how long he'd been in, and she said about 3 years, like she was counting in her head. Then she said he might get released early for good behavior. That's when she leaned in again and said she likes to prepare her dates for when that day comes. I thought she was joking again, but she wasn't. She said her ex has her current address, knows who she talks to, and that if he shows up one day, the man with her better not freeze. I looked around the restaurant hoping someone else could sense how tense the air had gotten, but nobody cared. There was soft jazz playing, the sound of forks clinking, normal stuff. Meanwhile, I was just sitting there trying to figure out how to end the night without setting her off. The check came, and I offered to pay just to make things move faster. She didn't protest. She packed up her kids' leftovers and smiled again like everything was fine. As we walked out, she asked if I wanted to walk them to their car. I said sure because saying no felt risky. When we got to her car, it was this old van with stickers all over the back window. There were car seats, toys, random clothes, and a big gas can in the trunk. She strapped the kid in and stood there for a second, looking at me like she was waiting for something. Then she said, "You seem dependable." I didn't reply. I just said goodnight and started walking away. As I turned the corner, I could still hear her talking to her kid in this soft, eerie tone, like everything that just happened was totally normal. That night, I kept replaying what she said about her ex knowing where she lived. I didn't sleep well. The next morning, I saw she had messaged me already. It said, "You'd make a good stepdad. Don't ghost me like the others." I didn't respond, but she kept messaging. A few days later, she said, "I told him about you. He said he's excited to meet." That made my stomach drop. I blocked her, deleted the app, and stayed off dating sites for a while. About 2 weeks later, someone knocked on my door around 10 p.m. When I checked through the curtain. There was a car idling on the street, but no one at the door. The knock came again, quieter this time. I didn't answer. Eventually, the car drove off, but I couldn't see who was inside. I never heard from her again after that, but sometimes when I drive past that same restaurant, I think about her sitting there with her kid, waiting for the next person who doesn't know what they're walking into. I matched with Jason on a random Thursday night when I couldn't sleep. He looked normal, honestly. The kind of guy who wears plain shirts, clean haircut, nothing flashy. His bio was short, said something about being into psychology, finance, and human behavior. I thought it just meant he liked books or podcasts or whatever. We talked for a few days, and he wasn't weird. He didn't flirt much either, which actually made me think he was decent. He suggested we grab a coffee near the pier on Sunday morning, and I agreed. I didn't get any bad feeling before meeting him. He seemed mature. The weather that morning was gray, kind of foggy with that smell of sea salt in the air. I got there first and sat at one of those small wooden tables outside the cafe. He showed up a few minutes later, calm, smiling like someone who'd done this 1,000 times. He ordered a black coffee and sat down across from me. 5 minutes in, he told me something that made my stomach turn. He said he used to run an online group teaching men how to manipulate women emotionally and financially. Then he asked me, straight-faced, if I'd ever considered being part of the system. At first, I thought he was joking. The way he said it was so casual, like asking if I wanted another drink. I kind of laughed, thinking maybe it was sarcasm, but he just looked at me with this calm, almost bored expression. He started explaining how he and his students used to make women dependent on them, emotionally and financially, and then redirect their value. I remember him saying it exactly like that. Redirect their value. He said most women didn't even know it was happening until it was too late. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened. He talked for a long time, describing how they'd start with compliments, emotional bonding, then isolate the girl from her friends slowly. He said it wasn't about love, it was about control. I asked him why he stopped, and he said he didn't. He just got smarter. That's when I realized he didn't mean it was in the past. He said he still mentored people, but kept it smaller, now less obvious. He claimed it wasn't about hate, it was about structure. According to him, women had been in control of the dating market for too long, and he was just rebalancing the game. I remember my hands shaking as I tried to keep a neutral face. Then he leaned in slightly and told me he picked me because I looked teachable. That word made me sick. I wanted to leave, but something in me froze. I was scared of making him angry. He had this stillness about him that made every movement feel planned. Like even the way he stirred his coffee had purpose. He kept talking about this system, saying there were tiers, like levels in a video game. At the bottom were the students, then the handlers, and then the architects. He said he used to be an architect, but didn't like being watched by the others. He said the system had spread across multiple cities, and that they used dating apps to recruit women, not just for money, but for information, stuff like personal data, contacts, and even access to small businesses through relationships. He said some women would unknowingly help move money or create fake accounts, thinking they were doing it for love. He called it relationship laundering. I had never heard that term before, and I didn't want to. I remember staring at the people walking by, trying to decide if I should just get up and leave. But he kept talking, quieter now. He said sometimes they'd have a woman date multiple men from their group at the same time to see who could break her first emotionally. He said they treated it like science. Then he started describing one woman he had trained. He said she was brilliant at first, independent, strong, hard to read. But after 6 months, she was sending him money every week and apologizing if he didn't text her back fast enough. He told me he still gets messages from her sometimes. Said she can't move on. He showed me one of the messages. It was just a screenshot of a woman saying, "I still don't understand what I did wrong." That's when I stood up. I told him I had to go. He didn't try to stop me, but he smiled as I picked up my bag. He said something like, "You'll think about this later and realize how much more peaceful it is when you stop fighting the current." I walked out fast. I didn't even look back. My heart was pounding so hard that I thought I might throw up. I kept replaying his tone in my head, so calm, so sure of himself, like he believed everything he said. When I got home, I blocked him on everything. I deleted the app completely, but later that night, I started getting weird notifications on my phone. Random friend requests from fake-looking accounts, messages from people I didn't know saying things like, "Welcome to the network," or "Are you still meeting Jason tomorrow?" I hadn't posted anything or told anyone where I went, so I didn't understand how they found me. Then one of the messages had a picture attached. It was me sitting at that cafe, the same outfit, same table, same moment. I don't remember anyone taking a picture. I hadn't even noticed him holding the phone. The caption just said, "Stage 1, Curiosity." I turned my phone off after that and didn't turn it back on until the next morning. When I did, all the messages were gone. My inbox was empty, like none of it had happened. But in my photo gallery, there was a new folder named Lessons. Inside was that same cafe picture again, but this time, the background was blurred and my face was circled in red. I reported it to the app support team, but he said the account was already deleted and couldn't be traced. I went back to the cafe a week later just to see if he was around, but I didn't see him. A few weeks after that, I started getting random calls from unknown numbers. Every time I answered, it was silent, just faint breathing. I stopped answering eventually, but they kept coming at weird hours, like 3 or 4 in the morning. It's been months now, and sometimes I still get a call like that, maybe once every few weeks. I changed my number twice, but somehow it keeps happening. I don't know if it's him or someone else from whatever system he talked about. I don't even use dating apps anymore. Sometimes when I walk near that cafe, I feel like someone's watching me. I'll catch a reflection in a window, and for a split second, I think I see him sitting at a table, staring straight ahead, waiting. Derek seemed normal at first, and honestly, that's probably what made it worse. I met him through a mutual friend who said he was quiet, but really thoughtful once you get to know him. His profile picture was basic, just him smiling in front of a park, wearing glasses, clean haircut. He worked in something medical, which he described as mouth-related healthcare. I assumed dentist or orthodontist, and I didn't think too much about it. We agreed to meet at this cozy coffee shop near the river. It was the kind of place that smelled like cinnamon and roasted beans, with people tapping away on laptops. When I got there, he was already sitting at a table by the window, flipping through a little notebook. He looked exactly like his pictures. Polite smile, calm energy, dressed neatly. We ordered drinks and started talking, just the usual first date stuff. But it didn't take long before the questions started getting strange. At first, it was small things. He asked if I liked sweets. I said yeah sometimes, and he smiled like that answer meant something. Then he asked if I went to the dentist regularly. I thought maybe he was making conversation about his job, so I told him I tried to go twice a year. He nodded slowly, then asked if I'd ever had cavities. I laughed awkwardly and said yeah, who hasn't? That's when he pulled a pen from his pocket and started jotting something down in that notebook. I thought he was joking, but he didn't explain. He just said he liked to remember details. Then came more questions. He asked if I'd ever had braces, if I grind my teeth when I sleep, if I'd ever had a tooth pulled, and whether I still had my wisdom teeth. Each time I answered, he wrote something down, and the way he smiled afterward felt practiced, like he was trying not to show too much emotion. I tried to steer the conversation in a different direction, asking about his hobbies. He said he didn't really have time for typical hobbies, but that he collected interesting things. I asked what kind of things, and he said organic things. He didn't elaborate. After a few more minutes, he asked to see my smile. He said it casually, like a compliment, but when I smiled, he leaned forward and looked closely, really studying my teeth. I started to feel uncomfortable. He said something about how my molars looked intact, and that most people don't appreciate how strong natural enamel is. I left nervously and said I guessed that was true. He told me he'd always been fascinated by how teeth were the last part of us to give up. He said you can burn a body, bury it, drown it, but teeth survive. The way he said it made my stomach twist. I thought about leaving, but he didn't seem aggressive or anything, just weird. So I stayed a little longer, hoping it would get less strange. It didn't. When our drinks came, he barely touched his. He just kept watching me while I sipped mine. Then he asked if I'd ever lost a tooth as an adult. I said no, not since childhood. He smiled and said, that's good. People get too attached to them anyway. That line stuck in my head for a few seconds before I asked what he meant. He said he thought teeth were meant to be released, that holding onto them past a purpose was unnatural. I didn't know what to say, so I just stared at my cup, pretending to be focused on the foam. Then he leaned back in his chair and said something that made me freeze. He said he hoped I wasn't too attached to my molars. He said it like a joke, but the tone didn't match. His face was calm, completely serious. I thought I misheard him at first, but then he started talking about how he used to help in dental surgeries. He said he loved the sound of extraction, the pop and pressure release. He said most people think it's gross, but to him it was honest. He described it in detail, how each tooth has its own sound when it leaves the gum, like a fingerprint. My heart started racing. I kept glancing around, trying to figure out if I could leave without making it obvious. But he wasn't threatening me, not directly. He was just calmly talking like we were discussing music or art. He started explaining that he had a collection. I thought maybe he meant something like dental molds or plaster replicas. But no, he said he collected real teeth. He said everyone told a story. Some were from patients, some from donations, and some from personal connections. He said the oldest one he had was from someone he dated years ago. At that point, I was done. I stood up, pretending I needed the restroom, but he looked up and said I didn't have to be nervous. He said he never forced anyone. He said most people offered eventually. I walked straight to the counter, left a few dollars for my drink, and left without looking back. When I got to my car, my hands were shaking so bad I dropped my keys twice. That night, he texted me saying he had a great time. He said he felt a real connection, and that my dental symmetry was beautiful. I blocked him immediately. A few days later, I got a message from an unknown number. It said, "You forgot to floss." That was it. No name, no context. Just that. I changed my number after that. A month later, I was scrolling through Facebook and saw that same mutual friend post a picture of Derek at a social event. The caption said he'd started volunteering at a dental clinic again. People in the comments were congratulating him. One person mentioned how dedicated he was to collecting samples for research. I haven't spoken to that friend since. Sometimes when I'm brushing my teeth, I think about how calmly he said those words. I hope you're not too attached to your molars. It sounded like something he'd said before, like a warning he didn't expect anyone to take seriously.